Good evening. Can everyone hear me? Yeah? Okay. I'd like to welcome you all to Urban Intersections, Black Queer Lives in New York City. My name is Paula Chakravarti, and I teach here at Gallatin as well as in the Media Studies Department here at NYU. And before we begin, I would just like to thank Jen Burge and Angie DeSocio and their staff, as well as our videographer, Victor Bautista, Mike West from the events team in Gallatin's Black History Month Committee, and Becky Amato, who has helped organize this event. So thank you to that whole team. We also want to wish Ayasha Garin, who is our moderator, a happy birthday.
Happy birthday! Thank you.
We want to thank her for spending her birthday evening with us. So before we begin, just a little background on the event itself. As most of you know, few calls to action have been as powerful in movement building as that of the Combahee River Collective in 1977. The collective, composed of Black radical feminists who identified with working class and lesbians, demanded an active commitment to struggling against racial, sexual, heterosexual, and class oppression. As Kianga Yamada Taylor has pointed out, the new relevance today of the Combahee Collective is in its insistence on linking Black women's oppression to capitalism and insisting that the liberation of Black women was connected to the radical reconstruction of American society. Decades later, this intersectional politics helped buoy the movement for Black Lives, the Black Youth Project 100, and other 21st century campaigns, from calls for sexual justice, sanctuary for undocumented friends, to the fight for a living wage and collective bargaining rights for invisible and racialized working classes. In celebration of Black History Month, the 50th anniversary of Stonewall Uprisings, and the boundless ongoing importance of the coalition building and the need to have transformative, revolutionary, radical politics, the Combahee River Collective message is the focus of this event tonight. And this event brings together key activists working at the intersections of Black and queer politics in New York City. So we're really excited to have our speakers and our discussant, and I have the privilege of introducing everyone. So bear with me while I go through these introductions. They're long, but they just tell us how impressive all these folks are that we're going to be speaking to. Our first speaker, Kiara St. James, is the co-founder and executive director of New York Trans Advocacy Group. And unfortunately, Kiara's not here, and so I will leave her bio for now, and we will introduce her if she can hopefully join us. Our second speaker is Cleaver Cruz. Sorry about that. Cleaver Cruz is an uptown native of New York City, a writer, dreamer, and lover of travel. He is the creator of the Black Joy Project, a digital and real-world movement to center Black joy as a form of resistance. He's a member of We Are All Dominican, a U.S.-based grassroots collective that amplifies the voices of and supports the work of Dominicans of Haitian descent and Haitian migrants in the Dominican Republic. His work has been featured in La Galleria and African Voices magazine, as well as on Vibe.com and the Huffington Post, among others. Cruz is also one half of the poetic duo The Delta, which has performed at the New Yorkian Poets Cafe, the Bowery Poetry Club, as well as served as judges for the World at Four Poetry Slam. Our next speaker is Jewel Cadet, who is a community organizer with the Black Youth Project 100, one of the groups I just mentioned, a national collective that emphasizes building chapters throughout the country to hone in on grassroots organizing and community mobilization to promote justice and freedom for all Black people. She is from East New York, Brooklyn, born to Haitian parents, a strong believer that the revolutionary spirit runs through her veins. She fights for the most marginalized in every way she can. I love these bios. They're so great. From rallies and protests to creating spaces for the Black queer community to live their best lives on the dance floor, Jewel prides herself on being grounded in the needs of the people. Finally, our discussant, our moderator today is Ayasha Garin, who is an artist and scholar based in Brooklyn, New York. Her work explores themes of urban ecology, community, and security in public and private space. She is a doctoral candidate in NYU's American Studies Department, where her research engages questions about the entanglements of race, nature, and value. Her dissertation explores the socio-ecological histories and resiliencies of waterfront communities in Lower Manhattan. She's currently a fellow here of urban practice at the Urban Democracy Lab, and formerly a graduate fellow of NYU's Center for the Humanities, and before that the Andrew W. Mellon Predoctoral Fellow at the Museum of the City of New York. Finally, before we begin, and I turn the floor over to our speakers and moderator, just a small note that Becky included here for me to point out. Some of you might have noticed the image on the poster for the event, and we just wanted to make a small note about that. The image in our advertisement for this event is of Polly Murray, a civil rights activist and lawyer who was a founding member of the Congress of Racial Equity, CORE, a major contributor to the intellectual and legal history of the civil rights movement, and briefly a New Yorker. Murray's role in the movement, like that of most women, especially women of color, received scant recognition at the time and has been historically marginalized. Until recently, this lack of historical attention has also made invisible her personal identification as trans, or in her words, a girl who should have been a boy. We wanted to spotlight Polly Murray's story, not just to acknowledge her relationship to the topic of our panel, but to recover some of the historical continuities that are too often lost in more practice narratives of the civil rights, LGBTQI, and feminist movements. So just a little background on that image that you can all take a look at online or in the poster, which I think is hanging outside. So with further ado, no more speaking from me. I'm going to turn the stage over. If you would help me welcome our speakers and moderators.
Okay, can you all hear me? Yes. Great. Thank you all for coming out tonight on this very cold February evening. So the title of this talk is Urban Intersections, Black Queer Lives in New York City, and we're really happy to have two Black queer New Yorkers here to talk about this today. And I thought that maybe a nice way to get into the conversation is to put a little emphasis on the urban and the New York City part, and maybe sort of like collectively map some spaces in New York City that feel particularly Black and queer, spaces that feel like places of Black queer assembly, or places where the sort of intersectionality of this identity is welcome and sort of free.
Yeah, I can start. So on the organizing and definitely Black Youth Project 100, which was uplifted earlier, just an organizing space where you don't have to check your Blackness over your queerness, or your queerness over your Blackness. And I think that's really critical, because I think in a lot of spaces people have had to choose and prioritize, and that's an organizing space where those identities are welcome, encouraged, and included in our activism. But then on another front, I think about the social scene and how critical that is, because I think that as Black queer bodies, it's a radical act to just exist as a Black queer person in this world, and to navigate the world in a place that just doesn't really want us to exist. So I think about social scenes as being a key to liberating our bodies by experiencing Black joy, and using, every time I think about Black joy, I look at Cleavers because of Black Joy Project. But so social scenes that, like party collectives, right? So like Brooklyn Boyhood, the She Party, just a variety of Black queer scenes that are curated for the Black queer community. And I think that's critical, because people will experience depression, and go to these parties, and just to be around community is really critical in terms of mental health. And, you maybe just had an experience with your boss who was being racist, or, all the things, homophobic, transphobic, and you go to this party and you're able to be around community. To me, it's that social scene that has been curated by people who just really want to just have fun with each other. To me, I think that those spaces are just as critical as when we think about radical activist organizing spaces, for those reasons that I listed.
Do you want to talk a little bit more about BYP 100?
Yeah,
People don't
so
know.
Black Youth Project 100 is an organization. It's a national organization that has a variety of chapters throughout the country, and everyone identifies between the ages of 18 and 35, and we have a very radical Black abolitionist lens, right? So when we talk about, so we're the ones that's going to be like, fuck the police. We're the ones going to be like, close down prisons, you know, from a really radical lens. And I think, you know, it's become a political home for a lot of Black youth, which has really been powerful. The organization was created when the George Zimmerman verdict was announced, and Black youth were like, okay, what do we do, right? There's youth organizing in high schools, and then there's organizing for folks who are older, but what about this 18 to 35 group of Black people who are angry and who want to fight for change? So as a result of the George Zimmerman verdict, BRP 100 was formed alongside, you know, Black Lives Matter as well, so there's a lot of intersections there. So yeah, a little bit about BRP 100.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yes. And I would add, when I was thinking about this, my apartment where I live, I've been really intentional about who is welcome into that space and that for it to feel like my sanctuary, and thinking about the homes of certain other Black queer people in my life that if nowhere else, when we're in a place like that, we have control of our environment. We get control of who gets to come in and out of that space. So for me, my apartment has been very sacred, and it's also my way of like holding on to the Bronx while it's becoming the like last frontier of New York City. I just really appreciate those kinds of spaces and being in the homes of other Black queer people who have also done that kind of work to be intentional about how we're together.
Yeah, when I was reading your website, Cleaver, I saw this phrase conscious collisions, and I saw that you were writing about talking about yourself as made up of a sort of myriad of elements, and it was reminding me. I've been like revisiting a lot of Black feminists. Thought I read this How We Get Free, which is a edited collection of interviews that Keeanga-Yamahtta Taylor published last year, and there's an interview with Barbara Smith, and they're talking about identity politics. And I think because this talk is about the sort of intersectionality of Black and queer identity, this part stood out to me, and I was going to read it because, you know, as growing up, I'm of the generation that experienced the right really take identity politics and trash it and make it feel like something you couldn't use in your radical politics. And so Barbara Smith says here what we were saying about identity politics. What we were saying is that we have a right as people who are not just female, who are not solely Black, who are not just lesbians, who are not just working class or workers, that we are people who embody all of these identities, and we have a right to build and define political theory and practice based upon that reality. And yeah, and it got me thinking, you know, a lot of the interesting political work in this time has this real emphasis on coalition building, right, and on solidarity politics. And I was wondering if you feel comfortable talking about some of the experiences you've had in coalition building with communities that maybe don't identify as Black or don't identify as queer, and how you navigate those relationships and what that's been like for you.
Honestly, I was just saying this to Drew actually, in the green room, that most of my time is committed to figuring out how we're going to get through as Black people as a collective, and that there's enough issues inside of that I'd rather spend my energy on that than figuring out how to bridge those things. Not that shouldn't happen, and sometimes in the byproduct of us figuring out how to get free, we figure out how to let everybody, us getting free is everybody else getting free. And so I think in focusing on that, we can figure out what those bridges are, or how do I build community, but the truth is for me, I'm more focused on how am I going to get my grandma to understand certain things? How can I have a conversation with my aunt or whoever? Then trying to figure out, like, this person that really is not living the life I'm living, how am I going to explain it to them?
Yeah, same. I feel like my purpose is not to bridge the gap. I feel like there's people who that's their purpose, right? There's Black people in community who are like, yeah, I want to build solidarity. That's not me. That's not my purpose. I want my circle to be Black, and I want it to be queer, and I curate that so that that's the case. So I don't organize for white people. People hit up my DMs and they'll be like, this thing happened, you know, what are you going to do about it? And I'm like, well, is this person black? Like, I literally ask these questions and they'll be like, no. And I'm like, well, I'm not the person to organize. You know, there's too much within the black community and within the black queer community for me to put that energy towards building gaps and bridges, and that work isn't meant for me. That my work is to work for my people, with my people. And like I said, whether that's like party spaces, whether that's organizing, I will share like a brief story about like how people don't like to feel like that. Like people feel away when I say these things. And so in BRP 100 in 2017, we had a party, and this party was a fundraiser, and it was for Memorial Day, and it was $5 party in a church basement, and it was exclusively for black people. And, oh, you attended, yeah. And it was exclusively for black people, and it was something that we did in coalition with Black Lives Matter and with BAJI, Black Alliance for Just Immigration. So it was BRP 100, BAJI, and Black Lives Matter. And so we curated the space specifically for black people. You know, I wrote on the event page, this is for black people, it's for black people. I kept saying it over and over and over. However, white people came with their black partner or like with their black friend. And I'm like, well, your friend and your partner could come. However, this is not a space for you. And that was like met with backlash. Like, I mean, backlash to the point where Fox 5 News contacted me and wanted me to come on the show and explain that, like, basically to say that I'm racist and like all these things. And so I declined because I'm like, what you're not going to do is like drag me on, like I said what I said, and like that's a space that I'm curating, and if you have an issue, then that's personal. So what they did was they had another black woman go on to defend the party, and this black woman lost her job as a result of going on this show, and it just shows, and she was a professor at a university, and it just goes to show that people don't like to not feel included in things that are black, because I feel like people love black culture, but they don't love black people. And for that, I don't create space for, like I said, those bridges and those gaps, because I know that people love our culture. They want to party with us. They want to ask what black joy looks like. I remember going to an event and a white woman asked, how can she help to cultivate black joy? However, and I was like, what? However, you know, they're not going to be at the front lines putting their body, you know, on the body on the front lines for us. And so for me, that's not the work that I'm committed to. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, like sort of follow-up question to that. How do you take care of yourselves and your communities that you are working with in the midst of things like this, like Fox News attacking you, or any sort of other sort of backlash you're getting to organizing solely with black communities?
Literally why I started the Black Joy Project was to figure out what the answer to your question. I think it's looked so many different ways, like what Jewel was saying, those kind of parties, which that party was really fun, by the way. Those kind of parties, burning incense, having just listening to people. It could be a number of things. It's more of just being present to what people need around me, and also knowing what do I need. That for me, for example, I need to be alone. I really need to be alone by myself. And so remembering that if I feel like this is intense sometimes to be in front of a lot of people.
Thank you for your vulnerability.
And so like for me, it's a recharge. It's figuring out how do I regenerate myself by myself. For some people around me, it's us laughing, watching reality TV. Whatever the thing is, I think it's infinite, actually, the answer to your question, and that I'm present to that, or I'm trying to be present to that we all need something else, and we have to figure out how to hold all of those things for each other, and try not to filter whatever works for you through everybody else, because my song or whatever, the piece of cake I need, is not what everybody else needs. And how do we do that? Because that's actually much harder, to listen to somebody else and be with what they need, and not just what you think is the right prescription for what they need. Because sometimes they need nothing. They just need you to sit and be there, like a physical presence. So yeah, I'm still figuring out the answer to your question, but I would say it's all of the things.
Well, can you talk a little bit more about the Black Joy Project? Because that sounds like a...
So in 2015, like the end of November, I woke up feeling really shitty, which is a contrast to my regular personality. And I just couldn't figure out why. I couldn't figure out the source of that feeling. And I also physically couldn't move. I felt frozen. It was like a shock to my system. So I laid there trying to figure out what it was and meditating on what it was. And then I had this like really intense, it was a spiritual experience. That's the only way I know how to explain it. It was like this really intense rush of sounds, images, like all kinds of things were coming into my head at once. And then the thing that was floating on top of that was the words Black Joy, which I had never necessarily put together in that way. And in that moment, I began to re-examine a lot of the things that I had experienced around that. So like thinking about and organizing that, we had parties, we texted things that were funny to each other, we took moments to like chill for a second in a really intense environment. That earlier in that year, I lost a family member suddenly, and figuring out that even in the like 8 months that had happened, my family still figured out how to have a Thanksgiving dinner, that we still figured out how to enjoy ourselves as much as we could with what we had. And so I thought, there's something there. So I remembered this picture of my mom that I had taken a couple of weeks before at this art gallery, and she was smiling, which I love. That brings me a lot of joy when my mom smiles. And so I posted it on Facebook with a stream of consciousness. I just typed, "Let us bombard the internet with joy." That joy is another form of resistance, and that we can. I mean, 2015 was also like a really intense moment of sharing all of these videos and all these things. And so saying that none of that is wrong, but we can also hold joy. That literally, Black people are the first people on Earth, so Black joy has been an experience and existence since the beginning of humanity, and that we have to also uplift that, and that it's a constant coexistence, and that often you need the latter to get through the former. Like all of the craziness and shit, the joy is a way to do that. That in the midst of all of this throughout time, people have celebrated, they've had weddings, they've had birthday parties, all of these things, and so how are we present to that? And that it also became a way to expand on my belief that Black people around the world have to connect. That we actually have to understand our struggles, that we have to understand that we are all experiencing things differently and similarly, but we have to understand that. That perhaps learning about somebody's joy is an entry point into figuring out how to understand their struggle. That if I'm speaking to a South African about what brings them joy, then I'm actually more curious about what is their context. In what context are you figuring out joy? In Brazil, where I went a couple of years ago, that's literally a genocide. The biggest population outside of Africa of Black people is being systematically murdered in the thousands. Every year, as we're speaking, hundreds of people are dying, Black people. And that I went there and people were dancing and singing sambas about taking down military powers is powerful. Like, how do we listen to that to figure out what is going on in Brazil that we need to pay attention to, because our people are literally being wiped out? And that us figuring out what a resistance in that looks like can inform what we're doing here in the U.S., can inform what's happening around the world. And that for me, I don't want to define our Black experience only through struggle. That's a yes and. And this is not about happiness or like showing this alternate story. It's showing that the world is fucked up, it's anti-Black, and in the face of that, we can reject it. That choosing joy in a moment, whether it's a minute in the morning or having a whole party or whatever the thing is resistance if you let it be that. And I'm saying that it has to be done consciously, and we don't have to call it Black joy. Everybody doesn't have to use the same words, but the point is that allowing ourselves to do that, and that inside of that, we also have healing. Like, I'm trying to figure out how we, as organizers, or what I've seen is that a lot of people are hurt, and we don't get the space. We don't get the space to heal, or even be with that reality that we're hurt, pushing through, basically, to organize for people. And what does that look like if we actually get to heal? And do that collectively, and not this, like, self-care thing where you remove yourself, and then you get it together, and then you come back. Because that isn't...
Right.
I don't get that part.
Yeah. So I think I'll start with, like, because I get that question a lot, like, how do you take care of it? Like, I do, like, 20 things. Like, I don't even, like, when we get to, like, what do, I have to write it down, because I'm like, oh, yeah, I do that thing and that thing and that thing. And so I I'm an extrovert, so I get my energy from being around people. However, I'm recognizing the importance of that recharge, and I will do like okay, I'm home, I'm not answering my phone, I'm not doing this, and I'm just watching Love and Hip Hop, and I'm just like, you know, like, and I'm just in my zone, or like putting music on, and I'm writing, or I'm reading, and I have to do that recharge. Or in the morning having a practice where I'm dedicating at least 30 to 45 minutes to myself, right? Whether that's meditating, whether that's stretching, whether that's journaling, and that is like uninterrupted time. And luckily, I have the ability to like live by myself and like have that access to not have to like have those outside, you know, things that will block that solitude time for me. So making that a practice, and then if I do have a rally or a protest that day, like even extending that even more, and listening to certain music that will help to ground me into like why I do this work. So making that time for solitude. But in speaking of Black joy, thinking about community and dancing, going back to dancing again, and I found that when I was dancing, so when I think about dancing and I think about what you said in terms of Black people, even in the midst of when we were in slavery and captivity, we found ways to like find joy, to have music, to dance. Like that's just like, it's part of like who we are and our culture. And I remember growing up in, you know, a single parent household. My mom made very little and things like that, but she would always like put music on and I'll be in the middle and I'm dancing and like whatever, like there would be dancing classes with my cousins. Like I just remember that. And I would be taking these Zumba classes, and for that hour, I would have so much joy just by dancing. But then I looked to the right and to the left of me, and people didn't look like me, and I was like, So what I did was I became a Zumba instructor, and then I was like, how can I cultivate an experience where people get to dance and be in their bodies, but to not have them look to their right and to the left and see people who don't look like them. So then I created Melanin in Motion this past November, and I was like really nervous because I was like, I'm not a trained dancer. I'm like, also I do 20 different things. How can I have time for this? Whatever. But then I was like, Jewel, you have to do it, so I did it. And it's a monthly dance class that's like Afro beats, it's twerking, it's whining, it's for all body types. It's only for Black people, and it's free. And at the end, people at the end, they're like, I want to give you money, right? So I was like, all right, cool. So folks want to donate because people have a hard time getting things for free because they feel like they want to, right? So I'm like, okay, cool. So then at the end of the class, I collect donations, and we as a collective of people are saying, okay, who can we give this money to in community? And not to an organization because I work for a nonprofit. But like people, right? So maybe that your neighbor in 3C who needs money for groceries for her children, right? And so people came to the class and they donated, and we were able to raise money. And I'm like, okay, who does it go to this month? And then they're like, hey, I know someone who needs that, and all of the money goes to that person. Because I'm like, since y'all want to give me money, it doesn't go to me. It goes to the person. And so I'm like, wow, that's combining dancing, that's combining activism, that's combining community all together. And that's been a beautiful experience to talk about how folks can dance and be in their bodies. And I've had trans women come and they're like, oh my gosh, thank you for like allowing me to like, you know, have the space to be in my body, right? Other people who say, I really hate exercising but I love dancing. But your class, I tell everybody, I'm like, it's not about the routine. I can't put a choreography, but you could just twerk the whole time. I won't go around and be like, you're doing that wrong and da-da-da-da-da. Like, there's none of that. Like, just be in your body, right? And do what feels good for you. And it feels really great. And I told my mom about it, and she's like, oh, you out here, like, creating this thing? I'm like, yeah, Mom, great. And I think it's really amazing. So, you know, my next class is on Sunday, so if folks are Black and want to come through, let me know. I have, like, 3 spots available.
Amazing.
But
where does this take place?
In Brooklyn, in Park Slope, actually. I know, things are in Brooklyn. And it's access to space, too, because where I work, there's self-defense classes, because I also teach self-defense, and there's a big space, so I have access to that space, so it's like a free space. So very Brooklyn. Cool. But I'm down to come, you know, uptown.
I'm so happy that our third panelist has joined us, Kiara St. James. Do we have the bio sheet? Because... Yeah, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. Hello. Testing.
Yeah, it sounds.
Can folks hear me? Okay. So, hello, my name's Kiara St. James. My apologies for being late. Had an emergency uptown. I'm the executive director and founder of New York Transgender Advocacy Group. We are an organization that is trans-led, and we believe in centering the concerns and issues of TGNC New Yorkers, you know, getting them acclimated to policies. Too often, my community is intimidated by policies, and it takes on a very elitist type of perception for them. So I feel that is my responsibility to get them acclimated to it. So thank you for welcoming me.
Great. So maybe this is a good opportunity to give you each a bit of time to talk about what projects you're up to right now, what sort of exciting things we should be looking out for in your work in the future.
Sure. Well, since you asked, I'm very excited that I have been able to really cultivate a lot of amazing relationships over the years here in New York City and New York State, as well as nationally. So the main thing that's coming up, April 9th, put this in your calendar, we will be having our follow-up TGLIB, am I saying all the letters? Policy Day in Albany, and it's a New York event, so it's not just for New York City, but for all of New York. So it's really getting all of the community to converge on the Capitol and talk about what our issues are. I'm very excited to say that we just came off 2 amazing celebrations, one being Gender. So if folks don't know about Gender Expression and Discrimination Act is a civil rights bill. Often people say for trans and TGNC, gender nonconforming folks, but it's a human rights bill. It's a basic human rights bill that makes it illegal or harder for businesses to discriminate, makes it illegal for housing discrimination. Even having access to higher education has been an issue outside of New York City. So gender is something that I'm very proud of. Also, we had success with banning gay conversion therapy. So yeah, I should celebrate that. You know? So next up is banning gay and trans panic. So that's on our legislative policy along with some others. Please go click on NITAC.org. We have a lot of that information and what we're working on. Nationally, I am one of the senior strategists for the Trans March on DC. How many folks have heard about that, Trans March on DC? Mm-hmm. So it was initially planned for April 1st, but due to, I want to keep it real, right? It was this Black History Month, right? It's the last or second day. It just speaks to the fact that there has been a long history of undermining Black trans leadership in this nation. Mm-hmm. And so oftentimes the question is like, well, who's spearheading it? Is it, so they're always asking about white trans organizations, like, are they approving of this march? I'm like, well, why do we need their approval? They should just sign on because it's the right thing to do. Right. Trans women, especially Black and brown trans women, we face so many circumstances that keeps us from acquiring the same level of quality of life, and so Black trans women currently in this country deal with a higher homicide rate than any other population, not just white trans or Latina, but any other population. Black trans women, we bear the brunt of that. One of the main reasons for that is that there's so much stigma attached to being attracted to trans women. And so one of the things I'm working on is a national trans amorous campaign, because a lot of the men who are killing Black trans women, they are attracted to Black trans women, but they have that fear of community finding out. And so that's one of the national campaigns that I'm working on. So,
wow, amazing. I guess I can go. So, like I mentioned before, Melanin in Motion, which is the monthly dance class that I curate, and then also in relation to a lot of what you said, so it's an honor to be on the panel with you. So I also work with youth who are experiencing homelessness, many of which are trans and gender nonconforming and non-binary. And so I was running this program about 2 years ago, and there were trans women who were talking to me, and they were like, I'm so frustrated because there's binders available for trans men and trans masculine folks, but what about bras? And the cute, lacy, sexy bras. And I'm like, okay, and I'm hearing this, and I'm like, okay. I'm like, I should do a bra drive. And they were like, yeah, you should do it. And life happens or whatever. And it kind of came up again, and I realized that I really wanted to do it alongside a Black trans woman, right? As a cis woman wanting to make sure. So actually alongside Crystal LaBeija, who works with NITAG, who I also made sure was hired at CAEs. So she also works for my organization as well. And together we're doing this bra drive that I was just like, okay, I'm going to collect some bras from community and we're going to disperse them to Black trans women and trans women of color. And then it ended up being this huge thing. And I'm getting shipments every day. I got a shipment from Rihanna's line, Savage Fenty, and this cute, lacy, lovely, beautiful bras. Emails blown up just from everyone wanting to give bras, and I'm like, wow, so now what do I do? So now I'm creating these pop-up shops. One's going to be at the Audre Lorde Project, one's going to be at the LA Fournier Center, and another is going to be, there's a BTG&C Resources having a launch party, so I'm also going to do that. Also want to go to Princess Shanae's place. So I have to do these multiple pop-up shops throughout the city. And then I'm also thinking about accessibility, I also want to get a whole bunch of allies, preferably cis allies, who will be doing hand deliveries to Black trans women and trans women of color who need bras, right? Because I know about the level of which it takes a lot to get on the train and, like, you know, get to whatever. So I'm like, okay, so wherever you are, we will be going and, like, delivering bras to you. And that has been something that was like a passion project that has become bigger, and I'm really honored to be a part of that and to uplift that. And because I do a lot of rallies and protests when trans women are murdered, and I'm like, you know, how do we honor Black trans women in while they're living, right? And I'm like, if y'all want bras, then I'm gonna organize the bras, whatever y'all want, right? And recently I was like honored for community organizing, and I was talking about it back, you know, in the green room, and I was like, you know, I shouldn't get honored for this work because as a cis person, that's my duty, right? I shouldn't get accolades for it. Some white people shouldn't get cookies for putting on a Black Lives Matter shirt. Cis people should not get, like, accolades for organizing for trans people, right? Because if trans women aren't free, then me as a cis woman, I'm not free either. So that's a major project. And then I spoke at the Solidarity Rally for Jussie Smollett, levels to that conversation. And at that rally, I uplifted, like, you know, that the solidarity really should be with the Black trans community, specifically Black trans women and genocide of Black trans women. And what I made a commitment to at that rally was that building out a community education series, because folks come to rallies because they put their shirts on and they, you know, and they go home and then they perpetuate violence, right? By allowing someone to talk about the trans community and you're just laughing it off, like, that's violence, right? Intentionally misgendering a trans woman when they say something that you don't like that's violence, right? And so building out a community education series where we're going into communities and we're talking about gender and we're talking about, like, what you said about, you know, it's like, okay, if you're a Black man and you are attracted to trans women, like, that's okay, right? Like, it's like, you know, how do we have conversations with community? And that's a gap that I'm willing to have and willing to do as a cis person, because that labor shouldn't just be on trans people teaching people about how not to murder them, right? That work needs to be with everyone is doing. So building out that series as well. Yeah.
I'm so inspired. I'm really thankful to these amazing people. I guess what I would add is it actually starts, so today's February 27th, okay? And it's actually what is considered the Dominican Independence Day. And I'm part of a collective called We Are All Dominican that formed in 2013 after the Constitutional Tribunal, the sort of like Supreme Court of the DR, passed the resolution 16913 that effectively denationalized hundreds of thousands of Dominicans of Haitian descent and therefore created the biggest population of stateless people in the Western Hemisphere. And so since then, we have been organizing in the U.S., and some of us have done work in DR to figure out how to uplift what's going on there. So last year we launched a campaign called 1865 to challenge today. So today celebrates February 27th, 1844, which is what is considered the independence of DR, which is really the independence from Haiti, which also makes DR one of the only, if not the only country that is not celebrating independence from their colonizer. And so this campaign that we started today, a couple hours ago, is called Real Dominicans Are Not Anti-Haitian. And because celebrating the 27th of February is also a vehicle for promoting anti-Haitianism in that country and therefore anti-blackness. And not just anti-Haitianism, but mistreatment of dark-skinned people who are working class or poor in the DR. And figuring out how do we challenge that. And one way is to be with reality of just present to that we're actually celebrating independence from our neighboring country and why we're not questioning that. How could we be so big about a certain day of the year that actually doesn't have enough significance, we think, to have that level of celebration. So we're starting this campaign where we're asking people to take a picture of themselves with the hashtag that's preferably if you're Dominican. That's really a way to push the envelope here. So if you're Dominican in the audience, you have some Dominican homies, talk to them about taking a picture of themselves and posting an image that says hashtag Real Dominicans Are Not Anti-Haitian. And so in the next coming weeks, it's not just, so I forgot to say, this is a coalition effort. So it's We Are All Dominican, another organization called Encultured Co., which does facilitated conversations between Dominican and Haitian communities, and a number of other individuals and collectives that we've come together, because we're stronger, the coalition, to do this. In part as an experiment, but ultimately it's about how are we having conversations as Dominicans about the anti-Haitianism and anti-blackness that we're persisting, perpetuating in all kinds of ways that even in progressive spaces of Dominicans, it's a real thing. How do we do that? Because this is another issue in a very Black community, that we're not addressing the white oligarchy and the other powers that are actually taking down our communities. We've made it about this other Black community and less about the small group of white people on that island that control a lot of the power and the money and stuff that's going on there historically and otherwise. And that there's a way to do that, to get into that conversation. So yeah, we launched today so that we can stop celebrating February 27th and start having realer conversations with each other as Dominicans to really, and that I also was really present at the beginning, that it's not a coincidence that I would be sitting here next to you today, because that's the point, is for these kinds of things to exist, that there's no beef and we're really with each other in that way. How do we build that? Because again, we all got to get free, not just a few of us.
And thank you for that, because just want to chime in, because when I saw that today on Instagram, I was like, because, you know, in my bio, I always talk about that both my parents, but, you know, my mom raised me, my father's a Debbie, so we don't really, but both my parents are Haitian, and my entire life, what I had to go through, the anti-Haitianism, I didn't even know there was a word for it. I'm like, people just don't like Haitians. That was what I came up with. And like I was bullied like severely by Dominicans, by folks who weren't Haitian, from voodooism to like all types of things, and Dominicans who othered themselves from me. And I would be like, we're on the same island. They'd be like, we are not, like whatever. And I remember just being like, so then I, as a result, spent years of my life, I'm like, I'm not gonna have no Dominican friends, right? And like, you know, and so there is that like, that beat that society says that we should have. So when I saw that campaign, I was so like, wow, this is amazing. So thank you for doing that work, because we shouldn't be divided, right? We're on an island together. So thank you for doing that work.
I'm curious to know, how did each of you come to your political work? Was there a moment of where you realized that you were being sort of radicalized, or did it happen slowly? Was there a specific event?
Yeah, I know I've always been political just because I'm originally from Beaumont, Texas, so I grew up in a part of Texas that had a very strong, thriving Black community. So mostly all the folks I knew were Black folks, you know, who were bankers, who were, you know. So coming to New York, I went through this period of wanting to like not just so tired of talking about Black issues, right? But then I realized that New York City over the years made me even more aware of my Blackness, you know, to the point where I'm very unapologetically Black, you know, and just understanding like, you know, racism is very different than anti-Blackness, you know, and I actually had a meeting earlier today where we talked about Jussie Smollett and some other issues in our community. So it was like a Black queer space. And I was telling them about how even looking for an apartment, I remember I have several trans Latina girlfriends. And I remember years ago, one of them was so happy that she found an apartment. And I was like, oh, I'm looking for an apartment, you know, can you hook me up? And so she's like, Mommy, the landlord doesn't want to rent to Black people, you know, and that was not like just a one-time thing. It's been a constant, you know, where I have people telling me like they live in a nice neighborhood, but people of color, but the landlord doesn't rent to Black people. So a lot of my work really takes on a very unapologetically Black, you know, fighting for Black folks, the Black diaspora, you know, checking Black folks on their anti-Blackness, you know, and just understanding that we have to do the work with first by addressing historical trauma and how that has impacted us and how we see ourselves in the world. And so that is one of the first things that we have to really remember, that there was a system in place to disenfranchise us and to also pit us against one another. You know, and so that is where a lot of my work is like really giving that historical background and really not just from a trans perspective, but I happen to be a Black woman who happens to be trans, you know, but my first identity is Black, so I always focus everything around that. So.
Yeah. I mean, I always tell people, because they always ask me like how I got into activism, and I always say that like I organized my campaign around like I was in 4th grade, and chocolate milk was off the menu. for some reason. And I was like, this is appalling. Like, this is, like, who came up with this? And so I remember getting a piece of paper, and like now, like, oh, it's a petition, but I didn't know, it was fourth grade. So I had a piece of paper, went around to all my friends, and I was like, we need to get chocolate milk on the menu. Who agrees? And they were like, me. I'm like, sign your name on this paper. And then I brought it to my teacher, and I was like, can you set up a meeting between me and the cafeteria ladies because we need to get it back on the menu? And she like looked at me, and she was like, okay. And I set up a meeting, and I had my paper, my loose leaf paper with all my friends' names on it and classmates, and explained the importance of it and things. This is back when I thought milk also, like, you know, milk actually isn't all of those things that they tell you that it is. But then I thought it was like supposed to give you like strong bones and good teeth and blah blah blah. So like all that, all the rhetoric, but it was all lies. But I brought it to, and they were just so impressed that like I was so passionate about it, and like I had like put, you know, a petition. And so they brought chocolate milk back on the menu, and I thought it was such a win for life. And so when I think about like my first campaign, I think about that. But to be honest, I think, but to be honest, I think that like I was politicized by my mother talking to me about my blackness, right? And I think when I think about POC and woman of color, I'm like, I'm a black woman. Like that's my, you know, I don't know, I'm not a person of color. Like, I'm a black woman. And I remember her looking at me, and when it came to school, and like she always wanted me to do really well in school. Like I'm not talking like not 95, she wanted me to get 100. And she was like, you're a little black girl in this world, and you have to always work 10 times harder than white people. And I remember just being like, who are these white people that I need to, like, because growing up in Brooklyn, East New York, there weren't no white people that I saw and went to school with. But she's telling me that I got to work harder than them. And I was like, yes, Mom, I will. And she, you know, and like, so, and she didn't have a high school diploma and things like that. So she put a lot of that educational, like, academic excellence, like, upon me. And I remember her just saying that to me. And this idea of my blackness, my black girlness, and how I have to work harder, which taught me that I can, you know, like if I work the same, I'm like just like the importance of harder, and I think that politicized me in thinking about my blackness and how true it is, right? That I can have the same educational background and I can have all whatever, but you know, a person's identity, when you think about identity politics, can get them further than me, and how do I like take up space and like have that not happen, right? So I think that her telling me that definitely politicized me alongside my fourth grade campaign.
Oh, fourth grade milk campaign.
Yes.
I never thought about it necessarily about being politicized, but definitely my mom, similarly, growing up with my twin brother, hey, welcome. My mom had us do all of the AIDS walk, the breast cancer. We weren't walking though, we were the volunteers. We were packing lunches for people. I remember once we did the MS walk, which is in the winter, if anybody's ever done it, by the South Street Seaport, and Walter and I are holding, what's that called, like bullhorns? Is that what it's called?
Yeah.
Screaming like, you're almost there, you're almost, like these kinds of things that my mom was always making it a point of, you don't do good to feel good, you do good because you're supposed to do it. And like doing things like that, watching her, she's 5 feet tall. I've seen her do stuff like, two people are getting, a woman, like a guy is kind of antagonizing this woman on a train, and she will stand in the middle or get closer and be like, what's going on here? A child is missing in the store, and she grabs his hand and says, we're going to find your parent, like that kind of thing. So learning from her about advocacy and doing shit that, because it's good, you should make the world better, and that's not about patting yourself on the back or that kind of thing, but you have the capability to do that, so you should do that, has really been instilled in me for a long time. And then I think going to high school, Walter and I went away to this is where I learned what liberalism was amongst white people, in this like small town in Massachusetts. And I got really angry. I just got really, really angry. And then my junior year, I read the autobiography of Malcolm X. You know what that does to people. And I changed my name to Cleaver X. No, I'm kidding. But that book, reading that, and actually, and also in sophomore year, I met Elizabeth Eckford, one of the Little Rock Nine, and that totally like blew my mind. That here I was in like 2000 something, basically doing what she did in the 50s, of figuring out how to integrate a white high school, made me really angry. Why did I have to leave New York City to do something that technically she had done 50 years before, so I wouldn't have to? Really made me angry, and it made me like research on how much money was being spent on students in New York City versus where I was, and writing papers about this in school and figuring out how to do that. Really got me to think shit doesn't have to be the way it is, and I actually can be a part of shifting those things.
Yeah, that is a good sort of jumping off point to asking, both of you, who are your idols? Who are people that you've met who have been leaders in leadership positions that inspired you to do the work that you do today?
Well, for me, I know the first person who was also of trans experience and Black was a lady by the name of Arlene Hoffman. And I remember when I was still a baby in New York City, moving from Texas, Beaumont, I was looking for services. So I went into this organization called PHP, Positive Health Project. And so I was waiting. This lady called me to the back. So she assessed my information. And so one way or the other, I found out she was trans. And she was very proud of, saying she was trans. I'm like, and you never engage in sex work? Because most trans women, especially Black and brown trans women, that is how we are able to make a living, is through sex work. So to encounter someone who's Black and trans and never had to encounter sex work was like, wow, there's something else I can do besides sex work. And so she inspired me. She passed away back in 2006 of cancer, but she's been an inspiration. But I also have another amazing goddess who's a trans experience. I got to give her a shout out, Bolly White. So I don't know if folks know Bolly White. She works at NIH now, but she's been like my inspiration. Like when other folks kind of dismissed me, she was the one that inspired me and let me, told me I could do this. Like I was one of the smartest person she knew. I'm like, what? You what, really? So having someone who looks like you and you see that they are navigating in the world with a minimum of drama in their life really has been an inspiration to me. And so Bali is that. She's a Columbia University grad, but she's not arrogant. So it's very, very rare because I have a lot of girlfriends. They'll lead their conversations as an academically accomplished Black. I'm like, okay, what does that mean? So if you're not academically accomplished, you're not on that level. So so Bali's one of the few academically accomplished Black trans women who doesn't lead with that as a statement. So.
Yeah. I think that question makes me think about community. Like, I am so in love with my community because I don't really have a connection to my biological family. Like, I talk a lot about my mom, but there's a lot of hurt and when I think like being a Black queer person and families not really understanding you and things like that. I don't. Like, I've lifted because I feel like that was my foundation. However, when I think about my family, I think about community and people who are friends in community or people who I'm in community with, and I see their work and I'm like, wow, right? And so thinking about one of my best friends, Erica Hart, and the work that she does and how, it started out her platform, going topless as a breast cancer survivor at Afropunk, and, the work that she's doing now is just so phenomenal. And it could be literally from like having some really amazing political education within her stories to like traveling and doing speaking tours, right? And teaching at Columbia, right? I think about other people in community, also alongside her partner as well, Ebony Donnelly, because he's also just a brilliant person. I think about other people in community, Elle Hearn, who's a Black trans woman who's just, every time I hear Elle speak, I literally am just hanging on every word. Like, she's just so brilliant. And I think about other people in community who I see and who I'm like, I want to really be friends with, and I just know their work is just so powerful. And I know that how much youth look up to them. And I'm thinking about Deborah Noel, who's in the audience right now, and I'm thinking about the visibility and how when I talk to youth and they're like, wow, like, and they show me pictures, and I'm like, and how they look up to people in community who I also know, right? And I think about how do we have people who are not so removed. When we think about idols, we think about people who sometimes who we've never met before. But I'm like, my community are my idols. I look up to each and every single one of them. Like, and when I went to go see the Black Joy Project at the museum, and just being like, wow, this is so amazing, and how much I incorporate using the phrase Black Joy now, right, from hearing that. And I'm just like, I look up to everyone in my community, whether immediate circle who I'm like close friends with, or people who I see their work, and I'm just like, when I press like, it's not just like casual like. I'm just like, wow, this person's out here doing it, and I'm so amazed and inspired. So my community are my idols, to be honest.
So how does creative work art and performance and storytelling fit into your lives and your relationships and your visions of the future?
Am I the default person? Okay. I really love the integrating of performing arts into policies and advocacy. I think it's really important, and it's how traditionally Black folks have been able to reach a larger audience is through performing arts. If you look back to the civil rights movement, there's a lot of famous Black celebrities who were at those events because they knew that having them involved meant that they get a larger pool of people coming in. And so that's one of the things I love to do. I remember one of the first town halls that my organization had. I made sure to so it's been a long day, that's my word, to include community members. So I had a young lady who loved to dance. So she opened up our town hall with Andre Day, I Rise. And so I just remember looking at folks in the audience who were like, oh, what's going on? Oh, this is not a regular town hall, I was like, yeah, this, and just getting so much positive feedback from folks after the town hall, like, oh, I've never been to a town hall where they opened it up with an interpretive dance, and I'm like, yeah, this is a space that should be affirming to Black and brown trans folks. And so that is one of the things that I am in the process of doing now, is working with our creative artists to really find ways to integrate that into the work that I'm doing with my organization. So yeah.
Awesome.
I think with art, or I guess performance art in a sense, when I think about, because I didn't get a chance to talk about BRP 100 as much, and I probably should, just because, I'm representing them here. And I'm thinking about the J. Marion Sims action that we did in August of 2017 to get the statue removed. And folks who don't know J. Marion Sims, brief history is he's known as the father of gynecology, and what he did was he purchased Black girls and women during slavery and used their body for medical experimentation without anesthesia, with the idea that black women don't feel pain. And while we're magic and amazing and critical for living, we do feel pain, right? We're human. And so myself, alongside three other Black women, Dara, Lisa, Alexis, and Jamila, we put on these gowns, and we had them with mock blood sprayed upon our vaginal region, and was in front of the statue to highlight the importance of just talking about that Black women, our bodies are ours, and to uplift this man who tortured our bodies is not okay. And so we amplified the work of the East Harlem Preservation, which was trying to get that statue removed for 8 years. And I think that jarring visual, even when I see that photo, it's haunting. And when I see clips of the action, it's haunting. And I think it's unfortunate that people need to see that level of performance art to get them to really get change, right? So out of all the statues, alongside the Columbus statue, which also needs to be removed, that's in Columbus Circle, that was the only statue that unanimously the city decided to remove. And I really do believe that seeing that image of myself and alongside those three other Black women in front of that statue with those bloody gowns got people to say, okay, this is enough is enough. But I'm how much do we need to put our bodies on the line for you to see, right? It's trauma porn. It's show us the ways of which you're so messed up, and then we'll do this thing, right? But we did it for the sake of, for justice. And I remember my mom, going back to my mom again, it was on the cover of the Daily News, and she was like, you were in a bloody gown, what was going on? Yeah. And I was like, Mom, it's activism, it's art. She's like, oh, okay. And I also want to uplift the piece around storytelling, because a lot of times in my bio, I'll talk about being a survivor of same-sex domestic violence, and talking about that because it's not something that I feel like I've heard. And even when I was trying to get support for myself that didn't involve, arrest, right, or policing in the legal system, folks immediately were just like, what did he do to you? And I was like, well, it's not a he. This is another Black woman who's inflicting this level of violence. And that was really difficult. And so I got into storytelling as a way for healing, right, and as a way to let other people know that domestic violence isn't something that exists in a heteronormative lens, right? And the queer community is also experiencing that. and how do we heal from it without, being like, oh, this person is bad, right? Because I do think a lot of the trauma that happens, people get ideas of masculinity that doesn't exist only within cis men. All genders can like enact that, but they're getting a lot of these things from their fathers and whatever, and they're bringing it into relationships and impacting the queer community and the Black queer community, and folks are really silent about it. And even for me, I got a lot of like, oh, you teach self-defense, and like, you're the strong Black woman. How would you allow this woman to do this to you? Like, I was hearing this from the Black community, and so storytelling became a piece where I was able to give myself a platform for healing, but then also have other people who also have experienced that to also come forward and say, wow, I myself have done that. And so this past September, at the end of this past September, I launched the Shattering Silence event that highlighted domestic violence within the queer community, and hopefully it's something that I'm able to do annually. And it was the opportunity for folks to literally just take the mic and just talk about, their experience. And it was healing for myself to hear and healing for folks to share with community.
I just keep getting moved. I would say I would like to just be organic about it, like figuring out what are the ways, particularly with the Black Joy Project, that started as one photograph of my mom, and then moved towards using my little iPhone to take pictures of people, and then getting creative about what if we were more intentional about backdrops, and that created an experience where people are getting to meet each other. And inside of that, Afropunk in 2016, I think it was, I had a booth there, and there was hundreds of people, and there was somebody on the line that I was talking to who I realized wasn't looking at me directly while I was speaking, because she couldn't hear me. She was talking to her friend who was signing everything that I was saying, and that really gave me pause, because up until that moment I kept talking about this is for all Black people, and actually it wasn't, because I was only doing one sense or one dimension of experiencing joy. And so that's led me to this last year in particular around sound, what does Black joy sound like? Again, with storytelling, I also think is really important to me and the work I've been doing. So we did a project with the Weeksville Center in Brooklyn. If y'all don't know where that is,
it's amazing.
You should know. But the Weeksville Center and the Black Joy Project partnered to create an archive for Black joy stories of long-term Black residents of Brooklyn, so that we could preserve their stories, particularly in Brooklyn, and some people in the Bay Area. And then in the summer, I had a radio show that was also in Brooklyn, through a Black-owned radio station that we spent 2 months. I got to interview people from all over the diaspora so that we can hear what that sounds like. That South African accent sounds different from somebody from New York, sounds different from New Jersey, and blah, blah, blah. And so figuring out how to do that. Sometimes recording somebody, I'll be in just sitting around audio. Maybe I should ask permission, but I just think there's something powerful about the recording the sound that's happening around you. So I like that. I have recordings of people I love laughing and enjoying themselves and telling jokes. I was gonna say something else. And writing. That's my true calling.
You're in a poets collective.
Hey, my poet partner right there.
And you're performing at the New York Poets Cafe.
We have done
You
that.
have, okay.
We have done that. It's in our golden years. But yeah, writing has also been a way for me to figure out, again, around this joy and liberty work and all of that, particularly through fiction, which I don't share enough, but figuring out inside of creating or telling lies, so to speak, how do I really tell the truth about what's going on? And so, but allowing my imagination to do that, and I think that's one of the biggest things about the Black Joy Project, is being present to imagination, and that being one of the most radical things we have access to as Black people, is literally creating this world that we're not in yet and then living into it. And that Black joy is a moment to practice it. It's a practicing of that imagining. That in the moment we're dancing or creating a performance or whatever the thing is, we're literally modeling what the standard can be. And that's what I'm working towards, is joy actually is the baseline, not the exception or that moment that we're trying to steal away from the chaos. But how do we use all of this creativity to let that be the norm? I want joy to be the norm.
Yeah. So what legacy do you want to construct for yourself or your community, or for the movements in which you work?
For me, I really feel it's important that the legacy that I leave behind is one of sustainability, making sure that my community understands that we have the power to shift how we see ourselves, shift that narrative, right? And also, get them to understand that they don't have to walk through this world as a victim, but they have, all they have to do is own their power, understand that they stand on the shoulders of so many that came before us. And our identity is not just a trans identity, but it's the Black diaspora identity, right? And making sure that they make no apologies for being Black, right? And how they show up in the world, and how their Blackness shows up in the world.
Beautiful.
Yeah. So our personal legacies, is that? Yeah.
Sure, or the legacy of the movements that you're in.
Yeah. So, so I always pride myself when we talk about like unapologetically Black. That's like, that's like the motto of BRP 100. And I think about the legacy for myself. It's like, I think even on being on panels at NYU, I'm like, I'm gonna wear this sheer shirt and my bra's gonna show, and I'm gonna wear these like leather leggings and, and talk with my hands and have long, right? Like, I think that is, when people think about people who do this work, I don't want to be seen as a respectable Black person, right? Everywhere I go, I carry, when I think about, the history of, the culture of being Haitian, and I carry being from East New York, Brooklyn, right? Like, not like, but like East New York, Brooklyn, like from the hood, and we talk with our hands, and that's just what we do, right? And so, like, how do I always be authentic in that and always be true to that? And even with the dance class, it's like, okay, I literally specifically would be like, we're going to twerk to Cardi, we're going to do this to this, and it's very intentional. So I feel like I want my legacy to be that unapologetically, like, I call myself a ratchet revolutionary, because I'll do a protest and a rally, and I'm going to twerk, and I'm going to do all of that. You know what I mean? I may twerk at the rally. It's very possible. I think I did that last week. And so, like, there's a whole chant, like, twerk for the rev, and you hype the person up, and you experience a hella Black joy. The person's in the middle, and they're twerking, like, at a rally. And so I feel like that's what I want the legacy to be, not this, like, where even for me, like, as a person who has went through levels of, I went to college and whatever, I have a degree of paper. That's what it is. I have hella loans because of it. That's what I have. It's really loans. And that's why I intentionally don't put my where I went to school in my bio, because I'm like, that doesn't matter. And so that's what I want my legacy to be. So when I think about, when people talk about me when I pass or whatever, it's like, know that she lives in her authentic truth. And I think about, I have a goddaughter who, who's from Brooklyn, who lives in NYCHA, who talks with her hands too, right? And I want her to see that she doesn't have to change who she is to do this work, right? So I will intentionally, like, invite her to things, and she sees me living in my truth, and she sees that she doesn't have to change. And I think that is a radical act, and that's a legacy that I feel like I'm hoping that this movement leaves behind, is that we don't have to put on suits and, like, whatever. We could put on a blazer, but then we could do whatever underneath it. We could, we could be ourselves, and we don't have to shift or shrink, and we get to just be ourselves as fully, loudly, boldly, vibrantly, as possible. And I think that's a legacy that I want for myself and for Black queer people. Yeah.
I want their legacies too. And I would add, my purpose in life is to tell the stories that didn't exist when I needed them the most. And that I want my legacy to be that I left behind, hopefully filled in some voids for other people. That there won't be a kid looking in a library and can't find a book that speaks to their experience. Because even now, I just turned 30 and I still haven't read the book that really speaks to me and I've read. So figuring out what that looks like and making it happen in all the different ways, if it's with words. Also learning about preservation. One of my really good friends, Rita Gay, student at NYU, she has really made it a prominence in my mind about why Black people have to archive and preserve our story. And so also using the Black Joy Project to do that, to make sure that there is something that said we existed and we enjoyed our lives. I think that's really important, whether it's a picture, like I was saying, recording, that somewhere there's like a body of work that says this was our joy. And like you said, around the world, the diaspora of it, and not just this particular experience, is really important to me. And I hope people just feel loved. So when they think about me, they feel loved.
That's beautiful. I want to give you a chance to ask each other any questions.
Cool.
Anything's come up while we've been speaking. But also, I don't want to put you on the spot if you don't have questions. We can also take some questions from the audience. Is there any? Yeah, we need a mic. Maybe you can. Okay.
I can speak loudly, it's fine.
Okay. I can repeat the question as well.
Okay, all right. So I guess I'm curious about how you guys take care of yourself in terms of mental health, because with activism work, it can be really difficult, especially as Black queer people. And on top of that, like you mentioned, like curating Black spaces, because like honestly, even if like white people don't say anything racist, like there's that self-policing that happens just in the present. So I'm just curious about how you guys take care of yourself mentally and emotionally.
The question was how everyone is taking care of themselves and their mental health in the midst of fighting anti-blackness and anti-queerness.
Yeah, I know we shared that earlier. I know you didn't get a chance to.
Well, I'm also part of the Ratchet Club. I like a lot of Ratchet YouTube.
Yeah.
You know,
send me some links.
My mind is very thinking about systems and how to dismantle them. So anytime I have an opportunity to just click on, like I love T.S. Madison, so shout out T.S. Madison.
Mm-hmm.
So I watch a lot of Ratchet YouTube just because I need to like just have something to take my mind away from like what I'm dealing with, what we're dealing with as a community. And so that's one of the ways I do it. Is a part of self-care for me. It's not to always be in a state of rage, you know, and I do find myself going there a lot, being angry. So I'm trying to do a better job of celebrating the Black joy and not the rage.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Mike's coming.
I never know how to project my own voice. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. I think this question is mostly for Joel, sorry. But I think all three of you might be able to chime in. But I'm wondering, like, what do you do when someone in community really, really hurts someone else in community? Just what do you do?
I feel like that question is like, my life. So, a buzzword, I'll throw out a buzzword and then I'll talk about the reality. So the buzzwords that people use is transformative justice and restorative justice, and everyone comes around and the person who's harmed talks about the ways that they've, the ways in which they were harmed and the harm doer. Like, that is the buzzword that I'm hearing in activism. But I guess what I'll do is the way that I answer that question is the harm, like people who've said that I've caused harm and the harm that I feel like I've caused with community. Is that okay if I answer it that way? Yeah. So, community off of personal relationships. Sometimes you can build relationships with people, and they could be a variety of different types of identities, and you have a falling out based off personal falling out. And sometimes because of the access of knowledge that we, of words that we use to attack each other, that also happens within community. Folks will throw different words, right, out. And so I feel that for me in the past, what I have done off of the harm that was said that I have done was a lot of me hearing that and me being like, you feel that way about me? That's not true. I'm no longer going to talk to you. And in hindsight, I look back on that. Like, that was like 3 years ago. I look back on that. I'm like, how could I have used a little bit of the transformative restorative justice tools to not dispose of these people or persons? But to say, hey, I need some time, I need a break. That was a lot to hear. Can we revisit in 6 months, or can we revisit in 3 months? I wasn't able to do that then, like when I started to really get into this work about 3 years ago in terms of like BRP 100. And so as a result, I was just kind of like, we have conflict. I'm just not gonna fuck with you no more, because I went back to like hood mentality. That's what we do. Like, you have a problem, we just not gonna talk no more. And that wasn't okay. And so, or I could have handled that better. And now in the ways that people have harmed me in community, it's a little bit harder, because people who have harmed me also have had identities which is very much oppressed. And I couldn't really feel like I could, address it because I didn't want to make them feel away. So I will admit that I also took on a lot of the harm that happened to me in community, whether it was, inappropriate touching or there was this or there was that. And I kind of took that and internalized that and didn't blast the person and held that in. And lately I've been thinking about what that means when we hurt each other in community. And I'm not about the public drags. I'm like, we're going to drag people, it's going to be white people. But black people need to have a calling in. And how do we challenge disposability? Because some people you need to do a cutoff, right? But other people just need a little pause. So I hope that answers your question that, I'm not perfect, right? I will never get up here and say, I've never harmed anyone, and no one can ever say that I've harmed them. What I can say is that I was definitely quicker than I am now to dispose of people because that was that's how I've been, ingrained in me, how it's been ingrained in me. And now I've been working on, how do I balance that nuance of boundaries, giving my space to people. Now I actively would be I need a month to you know what I mean? I'm very clear versus being I'm never talking to you again. So hopefully that answers your question. Thank you for that.
There's a question in the back.
Hi, I just wanted to ask more about your kind of perspectives on the whole building bridges thing, because sometimes I think as being black and being queer, your existence is somewhat building a bridge. Mm-hmm. And also for me, I'm mixed, and so sometimes I feel that on top of being queer. And so I guess it's kind of a personal question, but sometimes when I'm trying to figure out my own identity, if I showed up at the door to an all-black space, I'm still trying to figure out where I fit in, because a lot of times you have these mixed people like Obama and J. Cole, but they're black, so I guess I'm trying to figure that out. And also being in an interracial relationship myself, how you guys see that, where sometimes your pure existence is building a bridge, but you still have to create spaces for people to be able to really be able to express themselves or to just live without feeling outside judgment and stuff. So which is why I do understand why you create those spaces. So I just wanted to hear more about that.
Do you mind if I take that real quick, or after you?
Yeah. So I can relate to a certain degree. I have a black identity, but my grandmother is from the Philippines. But my mom always raised me and my brothers and sisters with a black identity, and so that's how I show up in the world, is with a black identity. I feel that it's not my responsibility, it's not your responsibility to build bridges, but I operate in intentionality and making sure that in order for folks to understand what the issues are in my community, I have to at least be open to giving them a little context of why we are who we are, why we act the way that we do. It doesn't mean that I have to do it 24/7, but I do feel that it can be, it's complex, right? I always say if I ever wrote a book, it would be called There's Levels to This Shit, right? And because it's there's so many issues that we're dealing with our intersectionality, me being black, being trans, woman, heterosexual, HIV empowered. It's just really something that is complex. It's something that you don't have to take on, in a day. It's something you can probably work your way into. But I feel that as a black identified person in this world, my first responsibility is to make sure that I am being poured into. And when I'm comfortable enough in knowing what my worth is, then I'm able to be in these spaces and have those conversations like we're doing now, because it's really, this is how we're building bridges, is, having conversations with the audience. And so it's a process, but I get flack from time to time. It's like, oh, well, you're not black like I'm black. I'm like, well, no, I'm black like you're black. And when people see me, they don't know that I'm trans, but they do know that they do see my skin and my hair texture, and oh, black person. So so there's layers to it, but I show up in black spaces. If people find out, I have my grandmother is well, that's my grandmother. That's not me. If a person tells you that they're black, or they're a woman, or whatever the case, then take them at their word. That's how I operate.
Yeah. So Well, like in BRP 100 specifically, it's if you identify as Black, right? So we're not gonna go and be like, if you come and we're like, please tell us your lineage. Let me see pictures. Let me see photos. You know, where's your ancestry.com? However, when we talk about that, people be like, well, what about Rachel Dolezal? Like, that person identified as Black, so, right, levels, like what you said. So, and also recognizing that Blackness looks different. Another thing, accountability is real, so I'm doing a lot of that on this panel publicly. It's interesting. I feel very exposed. But at this party, at the party that I mentioned, one thing that I want to take ownership for is that, you know, the party was curated for Black people. However, at the door, you know, we had to basically assess what Blackness looked like, right? And I think about how, you know, we could have done it better. And definitely got some flack within community on like ways we could have done it better, because that's essentially, for me, like what you said, we're gonna enter spaces and people like Black, like there's not gonna be a question, right? But other folks who are ambiguous, we were like, are you Black? And then if folks said they were Black, we let them in, but we recognize that we didn't ask everyone, do you identify as Black, right? And that's something that we could have done. So as a result, we were kind of picking, so folks who were light-skinned, folks who were, like I said, more racially ambiguous, they got asked a question, whereas someone who was darker-skinned, maybe had more coarse texture, you know, whatever, more phonetic, like, you know what I mean? Like, they didn't get asked that. And we talked about how, like, I'm looking back on that and being like, we could have done that better. But I'm thinking about also the privilege that comes alongside it. And I think about people who want to enter BRP 100 or any type of like space that is specifically around Blackness. I think it's important to recognize privilege. And I think me as a politic, I don't date people who aren't Black because I think about ancestors and I think a lot about you know, how Black bodies, specifically Black people and white people, and how Black bodies were loved in the dark, right, or raped in the dark. And our bodies were taken from us and sexualized privately, but publicly was being slaughtered. And so as a politic, I don't date people who are not Black. But I think that people who are racially ambiguous, who are mixed, and who date people who are not Black, to just recognize their privilege, because I think that when you don't, it's a disservice. But I do, you know, I would never be one to tell someone it's like, you're not Black. But like I said, I think people do need to recognize their privilege within that, whether they're in a relationship with someone who isn't, because society looks at you very differently, and that level of privilege is a real thing. So that's my response to that.
Hi. So I'm so inspired by all of you guys, but I'm sitting here, I'm really challenged and really perplexed by some of the things I'm hearing So, like, I like the comment you just made that a person should be conscious of their privilege. To me, one of the thoughts I have when you said that was, if I'm owning up to having a Black party, doesn't that sort of put me in a position of privilege? Isn't that sort of a reverse privilege? And so I'm wondering how you deal with that, because it's a little troubling to me, because if that's the model I'm going to present, am I feeding more of what goes on in the society at large, as opposed to, not that we have to integrate, but I like what I'm hearing, but I'm concerned about it. Something about it makes me feel a little uncomfortable. So let's talk about my Blackness, right? So I'm raised in an upper middle class Black family, but I'm every bit of Black as everybody else. And so I work at some of the other stuff, but I'm very proud of both sides. You know, I come with a continuum, right? And depending on what environment I am is what I present. So there's a privilege that comes with it. So I'm trying to understand, if I'm having this Black party, how do I do it and model it such that I'm not creating a situation where I'm out at large and I find myself at a party that's an all-white party and somebody says to me, you can't come in because you're not white.
That's history.
So it's the same rhetoric around like reverse racism, and it's not real. And I hear that you are challenged by it, and I want you to know that that is real. And I think as part of my legacy is to make it's to live and to say things that can be uncomfortable. And I think uncomfortability is real, and that's where we can hear things from different sides. But privilege isn't bad, right? I'm here as a Black queer person. I also hold a lot of privilege as well. Privilege, like I said, isn't bad. It's what you do with that privilege. And when I think about curating these experiences for people to look to the left and to the right and up, down, and to just experience Black joy is something that can only be cultivated, in my opinion, within Black people. I have thoughts on integration. I think that the thoughts of integration, segregation, the whole concept, I love being around Black people, right? But I know that I live in a world where it's not just Black people. But if you were to tell me which space do I want to be in, a space that is all Black versus a space that is diverse, buzzword, I will always unapologetically choose a Black space, and that is okay. And that also isn't for everyone. I've had Black people tell me that I'm racist, which isn't real. I can't be. I can be prejudiced. I can be stereotypical. You're not gonna have stereotypes. But I think that's critical to think about that. And it's never a challenge of because you come from a different class than I am, that you're more Black, less Black. That's something I've never said I don't feel. But I think that the wanting to be around Black people isn't a bad thing. And wanting to be in a predominantly or all inclusive or exclusively Black space isn't a bad thing. BRP 100 gets a lot of slack for that because we are an organization where it is of Black 18 and 35-year-olds, and people are like, but what about? Now, does that not mean that we don't? When we're doing an action, we might pull in some folks to be a police liaison or to do security. Yeah, we're going to call in white folks for that. But who I want to organize with, who I want to get free, who I want to party with is Black people, and that's okay. And if that isn't a space if that isn't a thing for everyone, that's also okay. That's something that me as Jewel, that's where I feel free. I feel free around Black queer people.
Could I add to that?
Yeah.
I would also add to that, something I heard in your question is sort of like a foundationalist equity in terms of the Black parties or the white parties or whatever, and that is not real either. That just looking at history, what you said about ending up being the Black, I just was telling Jewel at work right now, I work in publishing, which is very white. On Tuesdays in the morning, I'm the only Black person in that meeting every week, and I've been working there for over a year. And so thinking about like this is part of what happened actually, is part of the resistance or the questioning of when we want to be together exclusively, where the context really is that outside of that party, white people are having white parties all the time without naming it, without inviting people exclusively, and that's regardless of class, like Jewel was saying. And I think that needs to be acknowledged too, that us or Jewel being a part of a team that decides we're going to have a Black party, with the humility of saying like even that wasn't done necessarily in the most loving way. I think that's very different from worrying about if we're going to be the only what if we end up in a party where everybody's white and I'm the only person? Like in my head, that equation is not on they don't go together like that.
Mm-hmm. The question was, you go to the all-white party and they don't allow...
Which is the world we're in, though. That's literally the world we're in.
So, but what I'm saying is, we were talking about bridges, you guys spoke about it, but I really feel like what you guys are talking about is integration. And I like your response. Your response was spot on. Because you shouldn't be apologetic about being Black. And that was really sort of where I was going, but my point is, as we are not apologetic about it, what are we setting as we all start to move in this world together? So I'm just wondering, what are we modeling? So as you guys think about it, and you're active and you're advocates of everything we talked about tonight, what does it do when we're teaching young people to be unapologetic about being the color they are, about being Black, then we arrive at a party and we get the same in return?
Yeah. Well, if I arrive at that party, I'm leaving. Just for the sake of it.
Right.
Yeah.
And I also want to bring up the fact that in New York City right now, there's not that many LGBTQ Black queer like clubs and spaces, and those white queer spaces are really anti-Black in how they set out to censor who can come into their space who are Black. And so one of the prime examples is Monsters. Monsters has a history of anti-Blackness, and the recent case happened last year where a Black trans performer was told that by the owner of the Monster that he didn't like the people she picked for the flyer for the club because they were too Black and he didn't find them attractive. right? So that speaks to why there's a need for us to be in black spaces to affirm one another, as opposed to still being told by white folks what our attractiveness is and how we're being validated because of our aesthetics. Yeah. So I think that's really important for us to be in spaces that are black, you know, and not having to explain why we want to be in spaces that are black too. So.
Yeah, and even when I, you know, even for the broad drive, I had a white person ask me, well, what about white trans women, right? And it's always the what about white people, and I'm just like, that's not my organizing, right? That isn't my calling. I also want to highlight too, I went to a women's college, and not once were there like protests and rallies about how come people who are not women are attending that college, right? And that was a space for women. And so I wonder, right, and there's men's colleges too, right, think about Morehouse. But it's only when they think it was coming around blackness that people are like, what about this? What about that? But like I said, I went to women's college 4 years, no one protested, like, why are only women going here? And so I think we need to just think about that and spend energy on getting more black people in publishing, right? Mm-hmm. And spend energy there versus and also self-segregation is a radical act, and it's okay. And I just want to highlight that, you know, people have talked about that too, and I think that's okay. And I think the goal for everyone isn't to have the whole, you know, little black girls work with the little white girl. Like, that isn't everyone's dream. That isn't my dream. My dream is to be around black people and to be free. My dream isn't to live in a world where like that isn't my dream. You know what I mean? That is other people's dream, and I think that's okay. But that isn't my dream. I do believe very strongly in self-segregation, and if I want to be around, like I said, if I go women's college, that's what it was. It was women who were attending. And if I want to be around black people, then that's what it is, right? The Jewish community, they have their own policing, right? So that's okay. Chinatown, like, you know what I mean? Like, we do that in different pockets, but somehow around blackness, people are like, no, they can't gather. And I wonder why, right? I wonder why that is, that we don't want black people to just gather alongside each other.
We recently had a law passed in New York City that spoke to, it gave us as black folks the right to wear our hair in a natural state. You know, like, why do we need a law to tell us it's okay for us to wear our hair?
As it is.
As it is.
I would also add to that, inside of the unapologeticness is also letting go of the white gaze. Like, I'm not actually worried about what white people think or going to react to whatever I'm doing or what we're doing. And I think that inside the unapologeticness, as well as centering ourselves, like, actually my concern is us, and not whether I'm going to go to a white party and people are not going to let me in or whatever the thing is. So I think that's part of the work I'm committed, sounds like we are too, of like, how do we not ask, what are white people going to think about this? Or what if I end up in this party, but actually I'm concerned about what we're going to be doing, when's our party or whatever that thing is. And that doesn't always mean an exclusively black space, but it means that we're the center of that party. And we don't have to answer that. Like, we don't even have to bring up the question. Like, that's just what it is, because the world is set up otherwise. So why do we have to explain, like Jewel was saying, why do we have to constantly explain that to each other or other people when the change is just doing it? I don't know how to say that.
Okay, one more question here. Come on.
Hey, y'all.
Hey. Hi.
I like a little call and response. I was in the black church. I'm wondering about you all's abolitionism. What I mean by that is, if you think about one of the sort of tenets of the project of abolition, is really about reimagining public safety, or just safety broadly. What do you all need to feel safe? What does it feel like? What does it look like? What does it sound like? I think it's a little bit different than joy. I'm interested in the sort of material and immaterial stakes of safety for you all. And I think it sort of also bridges the sort of conversation about what all black spaces provides for us in a way that I think might be really productive for our conversation.
Yeah, thank you for that. You want to take it?
What does safety look like?
What does it look like? What does it feel like? What does it smell like? I guess I'm asking for an imagination around it.
So if I could envision, like, a vision board of what safety looks like, for me would be a space where I don't have to explain, any of my identities. I can just show up and be accepted, not having to explain why, and so I think that would be one of the first criteria for me, is to make sure it's a space where I can just show up being myself. If I want to be silly, I don't have to explain why I'm being silly, and so yeah, it's really a space that is affirming and uplifting of all of my identities. Safe spaces to me, and I know I think for most of us on this panel, is like I do find Black spaces safe for me. I do find I work in my organization is not a Black organization, right? But I do know that I like doing a lot of national work in the South where I'm from, and being around Black trans folks, Black queer folks, and just connecting to our history. So safe, and being able to express why I feel the way that I do without it sounding like it's racist or, and so, so I think just being around Black joy is a safe space for me.
Mm-hmm. And when she's safe, I'm safe, right? So when I think about safety, and I know you mentioned like the abolitionist framework, I don't look at it as like this person does something bad and they go to jail, right? Like jail, prison, like these are cages, and they really don't have a function of rehabilitating or having accountability. Like it's just not real, right? If you think about, like I also was a preschool teacher, former life it feels like, and I think about like punitive measures that are even used amongst children. Do something bad, you go in timeout, right? And I'm like, no, like that isn't it. Like people need to talk it out. If you said something, if you bit this person, whatever, like why? That's what happens. A lot of biting happens in 2- and 3-year-olds. And people used to be like, no, put them in timeout. And I used to be the only one that used to sit down. Like I was the only teacher who sat 2- and 3-year-olds down. And I'm like, can you explain why you bit this person? And they would be like, oh, because it took my toy. And I'm like, okay. And I would just have them talk it out. And I'm like, and it doesn't always as clear cut as that, right? But I think that if we really decolonize like this punitive measure of you do something bad, you go away, whether that's timeout or a cage, aka jail, aka Rikers, aka right, all those places. So to me, it's like, how do we make it where we have conversations? How do we unpack the trauma? A lot of people who are out here hurting people are hurting people because they've been hurt. A lot of people who are in these cages are there because of crimes of having to feed their family. And I'm gonna tell you right now, if I lost all of my privilege, and I had to feed myself, to feed my child, I will rob from you. I will steal you. I would go into your house, take your stuff. Like I would do whatever I need to do that. And a lot of people are incarcerated because of crimes of which, like, the world has made them have to do. And a lot of people are incarcerated because of a variety of different traumas that they have. And so for me, when I think about safety, like I said, starting out with when you feel safe, I feel safe. But furthermore, how do we as community, when we see things, how do we intervene? So when I think about even being a survivor of domestic violence, and I'm thinking about the amount of people who knew that it was happening, but if they would have intervened. So I didn't want the police to be called on her, right? I didn't want to sue, whatever in type of like legal, but I wanted for someone to check her, to call her in, and to get her the help that she needed, right? And so that to me is safety, is that community accountability. When we see things, when we see them, not the see something, say something, you call the police, not that kind, but like if something's happening to me, I can call you up and be like, hey, can you this person who's causing me harm is a friend of yours. And people do that to me a lot. Like I have some friends who cause harm, like, and people hit me up and they, hey, you're friends with this person, can you call them in? That's what safety is like to me. Right. Community accountability. Mm-hmm.
I'm not gonna add. I pretty much agree with that.
Okay. Well, thank you so much for sharing your stories with us. I think one of the things that comes up a lot in the early writings of Black feminist theorists is this importance of telling your own story, and that the telling of your own story is a radical act, and that is how we get free. So I'm really, really happy that you all have come here and been vulnerable with us and shared all of your opinions and life experiences, and I hope you have a beautiful night.
Thank you.
And thank you all for coming and joining.